Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Better Sex Podcast. This is Jessa, and I am glad you're here. Thank you. I know that, there's a zillion podcasts these days, so I appreciate you tuning in and spending some time with me. So in my endless journey here to bring easy intimacy to couples all around the world, and that might sound really weird, but I actually mean that, right? Like, I really want to help everybody get to easy intimacy. You guys just deserve that. This is the way it should be. I am starting to seek out podcast guests that really align with that goal, and not so many extraneous topics that don't relate to that. And my guest today is going to be talking about blocks to orgasm, specifically with women, although a lot of what she talks about would apply to men too. So it's not just women, but she's talking about blocks to obstacles, internalized belief systems that keep us from pleasure. And this sort of falls under the first pillar of intimacy with ease, this discover phase of understanding why you're stuck. What has got you trapped? What are the particular obstacles you have? And then recreating your definition of sex and your understanding of sexual desire and, sort of correcting all these myths and expectations so that you're prepared to move forward to fix your sex life. So understanding these blocks really falls in that part of the method. And then she gives some really practical advice about what to do about that, which would fit under the whole practice part. Because again, change doesn't happen just from insight. It comes from insight plus learning to behave differently. It takes practice. So it's really, really important. So I love that she's sort of straddling these two things. There's understanding, but there's also an action plan. So Kim Akrigg is here to talk with me today about blocks to orgasm and becoming more orgasmic. So I hope you get a ton out of the show. And before we start the show today, it is sponsored by Intimacy with Ease. It's a method to help otherwise happy couples achieve a sex life that is easy and fun for both of them, so that you can actually just enjoy your sex life with zero stress. For more information, if you want to watch a brief little training video that's available, all of that, go to intimacywithease.com. So thank you, Kim, so much for being with me on the show.
Thank you for having me here.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. What's your interest in this topic? Blocks to orgasm, women that struggle to orgasm. What has drawn you to that topic?
I think it's such an interesting question because I think everyone, at the end of the day, everyone deserves to feel pleasure and joy. And when you feel blocked from orgasming, I feel like it's this cultural attitude towards female pleasure. Even if you look at movies, a female orgasm gets rated higher in terms of a male one. And it's just we are constantly bombarded with this attitude that women don't deserve to have pleasure, or it always has to be with a man being there. They can't just have their own autonomy around feeling their own joy and feeling their own pleasure. And I just think it's total BS. I'm
right.
Why are they trying to control us in this way? Mm-hmm. And I think really lately, that cultural narrative has really opened up, and I think women are kind of sick of it, and they are exploring their own sexuality more and what that means to them. And I think it's so important for people to realize on a subconscious level where a lot of their blocks come from, because you can't heal what you can't feel, and understanding where a block comes from is really helpful when it comes to removing it. So that was a long answer to a short question.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. there's a lot to rebel against, it seems to me, in our culture, in the media, in the messages that we get. So,
yeah, absolutely.
So what are some of the most common reasons that women would struggle to orgasm? Like, what are some of these blocks that people might have?
I feel like with a lot of my clients, it is something that happened to them like early in childhood, where like I think children are naturally curious, and children like they'll like put their hands down their pants or whatever because they're exploring and something feels good to them, and then something happens to them where they get shamed for it. Like maybe a parent sees them and is like, "Oh, don't do that," or like, "What are you doing?" or like, "That's not appropriate." And children see things in absolutes, and they're like, "Oh, well, I did something wrong. Like it must be bad what I did." And the parents never really take the time to explain like, "Oh, like there's nothing wrong with what you're doing, but that's something you do on your own. Like that's a private thing. And like, this is what you can do in public." They never take the time to actually explain that. And so from a very young age, children are taught like, "Oh, like that's not appropriate. It's bad." But then no one stops to tell you when you're adult that it's like, there's nothing wrong with sexual pleasure explored in the right environment. But as an adult, we still have that internalization of like, "Oh, well, I'm doing something wrong. This is bad."
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. What other kinds of things do you think block women?
Well, I guess obviously like sexual trauma. I think this is something that whether it goes reported or whether it goes not reported, and even like depending on the spectrum of like how, I guess I don't want to say big or small, but like how intense the experience was, this all contributes to sometimes like people kind of like cut themselves off from like wanting to experience that, or like they had such a bad experience that they kind of block themselves off in the future, because when we go through something traumatic, like our mind really wants to numb us out. It wants to like almost desensitize us so that we just don't feel anything. So like, yeah, we don't feel anything bad, but we also don't feel anything good. So that can be something that happens as well. I think there's also a lot of shame from like, say, if you grew up in a religious household, or like the cultural collective attitude of like what it means to be a woman. And if you're like too into enjoying your sexual pleasure, then you're a slut. And then there's like no space for like that spectrum of like sexuality. It's like you're either like a prude or a slut. And there's just all this messaging from the collective that gets absorbed.
Right. I also think, I hear something here from clients or I see a lot is people that just have never been raised to think about their own needs and pleasure. And I think it can actually happen with men too, but maybe more often with women who are raised and just sort of supposed to please their partner. It's for the other person. I'm just showing up. I've never really thought about this as for me. And so often it seems to go back to childhood where they've been raised not to think about themselves in a lot of ways, not just sexually, So there's just sort of a disconnect to desire sometimes.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people, but like women especially, they almost have a block around receiving. And so it's like, if you can't receive in other areas of your life, then you're not going to be able to receive in like your sex life either, because you're just like, "Oh, well, like maybe I don't deserve it," or "I'm not supposed to be the person who is receiving. I'm supposed to just be giving," or like just do something to make my partner happy.
Yeah. Yeah. And if they've never allowed themselves to receive or explored that, then a lot of people don't even know what they want. Right? Like there's just sort of a total lack of, I don't even know what would turn me on or would feel good. I've got no idea. I've never thought about it, never explored it. So what's the,
absolutely.
How does the subconscious mind play into this? Like how, I guess sort of what is that? How do you define it?
This question.
And then how does it influence?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to think of your mind almost like an iceberg. And so your conscious mind is like the top part of the iceberg that you can see above the water. And that's the part that we're really quite in touch with, because it makes the decisions. It kind of does the thinking. It does the overthinking. It's like the part of your mind you can connect with really easily. And then your subconscious is like the rest of the iceberg that's under the surface, where you can't see it, but it's very much there. And it's almost like steering the ship. And your subconscious, it remembers everything that ever happened to you from like in the womb to like your present day. It stores all of it, but we don't really have the ability to recall most of it because it's stored in our subconscious. But it kind of takes the things that happen to you and almost forms the programming for your, like, if your mind was like a computer, it would be like the computer's like programming structure. And so it takes the things that happen to you in like early childhood from the ages around 0 to 7, you're almost in a hypnotic brain state as you go through the world. And so that's why like children really get like programmed, if you will, about like everything that's going on. And then that programming stays with you. And then your subconscious is kind of just projecting that out. And so it's kind of the thing that is like, it's telling you to blink without you having to consciously think about blinking. It's telling your hair to grow. It's keeping your heart beating. So it's kind of doing all those things so your conscious mind doesn't have to think about it. But when it comes to like behavior or patterning, it kind of controls really how we feel about something, because it'll sort of reference the first time that something similar to that stimulus happens to you. And then it'll just project out that same reaction. And it does this because your mind is sort of, I don't want to use the term lazy, but it likes efficiency. So it's like, okay, well, this stimulus happened to you like at this point in time, and now something similar is happening to you again. So I'm going to reference that first time this happened, see what your reaction was, and kind of project that out to what's happening now, so that you don't have to keep coming up with a new decision process for every single thing that happens to you. And so if we have something that happened and our subconscious stores it as like, okay, this thing is not safe, or this thing is not available to me, or like I'm not enough, so I don't deserve this thing, then that's what we're going to project out in our behavior in our present day. And then so if we don't feel like something is available or possible to us, we won't take action on it, because your mind is never going to want to take an action on something it doesn't feel like it's possible for them.
So do you have some examples? I mean, just, make believe, like what kinds of things might have happened that are stored in our subconscious that would then be showing up in sex? I mean, obviously there's things like trauma, but it sounds like you're talking about more subtle experiences, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. So just referencing like a past client that I worked with, like she really was having trouble orgasming, and she couldn't really figure out why. It was like she would almost get there, and like she was like with a partner and she loved that partner, and like this thing it was never really quite happening for her. And so when we regressed her back, the first thing that she remembered is like being like really, really small. And you know how kids play that game, like, oh, I'll show you mine if you show me yours. Mm-hmm. And so she was doing that with like a neighbor. Her parents caught them. She got in really big trouble. And so the message that she kind of internalized was like, oh, like I did something bad. Like I must be wrong. There's something bad about me when I did this. And then another time, she was maybe around like 7 or 8, and she was just like in her room, but the door was open, and I think she must have been in bed, but she was touching herself, and her stepdad walked by, and he just gave her this look like of disbelief, like, what are you doing? Like he was just disgusted with her. He didn't say anything, but he just gave her this look and then like walked away. And then she was like, oh, like I must be doing something wrong. But when you're that age, you don't think you're doing anything like wrong per se. You're just doing it because it feels good. And so all of these things combined were really creating this thing where it was like this block between her and orgasming, because she was like, when she was having sex, she had so much shame around it that she could never fully let go and like experience the moment, because she always subconsciously felt like she was doing something wrong.
So it also sounds to me like just that look, something you might never remember or notice. I mean, like not a big deal, could be internalized in a really dramatic way. And you can even misunderstand somebody's look, right? Like things happen. It wasn't even
100%.
they just stubbed their toe, and that's why they had that look on their face. But you might have taken that in and gotten that all programmed in.
Oh, totally. And that's a big thing too, is a lot of the time, like clients will be like, wow, I never saw it from that perspective. Like when I was looking back retroactively, but in that moment, like I remembered that thing so significantly. But it's like, that's why sometimes we don't realize the things that are affecting us, because when we look back on it, like your memory obviously changes over time. And so you're like, oh, well, I don't see how that's that significant or important. It just seems like it was such a little thing. But to you at the time, it was a big thing. And that's how your mind stores it.
So how do you tell the difference between somebody who's got some sort of block to orgasming and somebody who just yet, I mean, maybe this is not a distinction, I don't know, who hasn't figured out yet, like, what we think of as pre-orgasmic, just doesn't get the stimulation they need? or just hasn't yet discovered what it is they like, that seems like different than some sort of block, like somebody's can get close and just sort of can't get over. I mean, does that question make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess it's hard to say because you don't know what's going on in your subconscious until you go back in there and look. But I think also if someone maybe like doesn't have a lot of experience with like their own self-pleasuring or like being with a partner who maybe really paid attention to it, I would say like, okay, well, maybe it's time for them to do a bit of their own exploration and try a couple different things or like start researching it and just experimenting basically. And then once maybe if they feel like they've tried a lot of different things and they're still not getting the reaction that they want, then I would say, okay, well, maybe now is a good time to start looking like what's going on in your subconscious, like what limiting beliefs come up for you around sex, like looking at that relationship and just being like, okay, well, straight away when you think about like what it means to orgasm, like what are the first beliefs that come up for you almost automatically? Like, do they think like, oh, I can't do that, or like whatever it is, just noticing, having that awareness of like what are the thoughts that are coming up for them then it's a great spot to start exploring like what's my story around this.
Hey, this is Jess. I'm just taking a quick break, and I want to make sure you know about the guide I wrote about how to talk to your partner about sexual concerns. This comes up a lot in my practice. People have struggles, and it takes them so long to bring it up with their partner. They're afraid that that conversation is going to go badly. Their partner's going to be upset. The partner's going to be defensive, or they just don't know how to talk about sex and sexual problems. Common problem. So I wrote this guide that really helps you address this. It helps you prepare for the conversation, how to introduce the conversation, and then tips about how to actually get through the conversation so that you can change things with your partner as a team. If you are interested in this guide, you can find it at bettersexpodcast.com/guide. Again, bettersexpodcast.com/guide. Happy to send it to you. So that does lead into sort of what do we do about this? How can women become more orgasmic? What's this process, or what are the kinds of things that you work with people to do?
Yeah, totally. I use like a modality called rapid transformational therapy. So that's how I find out with people like what's going on in their subconscious. So basically it combines like hypnosis, cognitive behavioral therapy, NLP, and Gestalt therapy. And so basically you're in a hypnotic state, and we go back to 3 or 4 memories of like, when did this problem start for you? And then we find out what's the meaning you created out of those events, because it's never actually what happened to you. It's the meaning that you've created out of it. Right. And then we reinterpret the meaning, show the person why that's no longer their truth. That's no longer them. And then we re-imprint them with new empowering beliefs in like a hypnotic recording that they get to listen to for 21 days. So that's how we kind of tackle things on a mindset thing. And then when it comes to like, I guess more of a practical thing, I would encourage people to like just start exploring, like take the time to get to know your own body, and like maybe start listening to podcasts or like looking up like books or workshops, and just like opening your mind to like, okay, these are the possibilities of what you could do, because we don't know what we don't know. So when you actually start to learn about like the actual like practical side of things combined with the mindset, I'm like, well, you're definitely going to move forward from where you were previously.
And how much of the time, what percentage of people-ish, are really going to find their orgasm alone, like before it with a partner, or how many people do this in partnered sex? I mean, do you generally advise that people do this alone and then you share it with a partner?
Oh, I mean, I guess it's very dependent on the partner that you're with, because I think that's like a whole other conversation. Whereas like if you've been with your partner for a really long time and they've always been doing the same thing, and all of a sudden you're like, actually this isn't working for me. Like that's a totally different conversation.
Right.
So it's really dependent on your relationship. but I always think like self-exploration is the best place to start, because then you can find out what you like. And when you know what you like, you can communicate that to another person. But you going to another person and just being like, this isn't working for me, isn't really constructive communication, because then they're like, well, what isn't working for you? And then, but if you go to them and be like, hey, like, I really like XYZ, can you try and do this? Or even just like showing them, it can be a great way to making like that happen with a partner. But I really think people need to explore on their own and really find out what it is they actually like. Yeah, and there's a lot less pressure when there's not another person.
Yeah, exactly. I give that same advice often, just so there isn't the pressure of time or rushing or somebody watching or paying attention, or, it just sort of removes some variables if you can be alone, right? And do some of that.
Totally.
Yeah.
100%.
Right. Anything else people should know? Well, here's another question I get from clients in therapy sometimes is they're not sure if they've had an orgasm. They don't know. Maybe that was it. Like, I think sometimes people have some idea that the angels are supposed to sing, or they have some idea what it's supposed to seem like versus what their experience is. How do you talk to people to help them figure out what an orgasm
is? Has it happened or has it not happened?
Has it happened or not? Or what are they looking for? How do they know? What's the potential there?
Yeah, totally. That's a great question. I think it's sort of like, I guess if they're unsure, I feel like when it does happen though, you kind of know. And so if you're unsure, then I would be like, okay, well, maybe it hasn't happened. But also depending what their expectation of like what's going to happen is, like, it's like if they think the sky's going to open up and angels are going to sing, well, it's like they might be a little disappointed. But right. If they can like pay attention to the sensations in their body and be like, okay, like, does this feel good? And also I think sometimes with sex, like, stop being so goal oriented. Like instead of like racing to this finish line and being like, I orgasmed, amazing, like we hit the goal, being like, does this feel good to me? And if it feels good, keep doing it. If it doesn't feel good, try something else, and stop making like the orgasm being like the be all end all if we had like successful sex. Cause I don't really think there is such a thing. I think it's just like, did it feel good? And if it felt good, great. Like continue working with that until you don't want to do it anymore.
Right. And so for the women that feel like, oh, I think I get close. I mean, I can get to a certain point and then I just can't get past that. Do you think that is mostly these kinds of blocks that you're talking about? There's some sort of belief system or programming that is preventing them from that?
Yeah, I think so too. Like, I feel like if it consistently feels like they're getting like almost there, but then it's just not quite happening, I think that's like a great time to start looking at like, what is your subconscious patterning around what's going on here? And like, why is this happening? It's like a great way of just going to the next level with understanding what's going on in your mind and your body. Yeah.
All right. And for people that maybe don't have a practitioner of rapid transformational therapy right nearby or, within their state or something like that, like, are there any tips you'd give women just that could work on their own, sort of chip away at those blocks themselves without somebody putting them into a hypnotic state?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like kind of how I was mentioning before, like noticing like, okay, when you think about like sex and having an orgasm, like what are the thoughts that first come up for you? Is the first thought like, oh, I can't do that, or like that doesn't happen for me, or like I get really close, or like maybe on a deeper level, I don't deserve it, or whatever. Just noticing like, what is that dialogue going on, and start communicating with your mind in a different way. Like our mind is always kind of dialoguing with us. And so it's kind of on us to use really descriptive, powerful language to tell our mind what we want. And so like maybe even just like affirming with yourself, like, I am orgasmic, like this is going to happen for me. Like I deserve the pleasure that I want to have. Like keep dialoguing with your mind instead of using language like, oh, I can't do that, or like, that's not possible for me, because your mind is always just kind of proving back to you what you believe. Like we get what we believe. So start giving your mind different suggestions, just telling it, I am orgasmic. This is going to happen for me. I'm getting closer to it every day. Like this will work. And just really giving yourself that positive input is a great way to start shifting your beliefs.
Do you do that just in the moment as you're aware of those negative thoughts? Or you said something about a 21-day, is this something people should say out loud as an affirmation in the morning, or record it and listen to it at bedtime? Like any suggestions that way?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you can practice like self-hypnosis, because hypnosis just basically puts you into a highly suggestible brain state. So when I tell people to do this, basically what you do is you roll your eyeballs up, like you're looking into your own eyebrows. And then you take a couple of deep breaths, closing your eyelids down, keeping your eyeballs up. And then after, you take another breath, and then you can imagine that you're looking down a staircase. And so then you would just count yourself down the staircase and be like 10 going deeper, 9 going deeper, 8 going deeper, and so on and so forth until you get down to 1. And I definitely advise doing this lying down or sitting somewhere. Don't do it while you're driving. It's always just worth mentioning.
Yeah.
And then just start giving yourself those suggestions and just telling yourself that things in the positive, like imprinting into your mind, being I am orgasmic. It feels really good when my partner touches me. It feels really good when I touch myself. I'm choosing to believe X, Y, Z, sex is a beautiful thing. And just giving yourself those suggestions while you're in that self-hypnosis. And then this is really effective to do either first thing in the morning or right before you go to sleep, because that's kind of the easiest time to access your subconscious. And then when you want to come out of it, just count yourself back up the stairs and be on the count of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, you're now awake.
Okay. And I except if you're driving, there's no danger to this. If you forget to count yourself back that, whatever, you're not stranding yourself in some sort of weird plane, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You can't. Hypnosis is never going to hurt you. Never. You can't really harm yourself by doing this. And I think a lot of the time people have this question. They're like, "Am I deep enough?" But the thing is depth of trance is not linked to results. It's more about that repetition, because it takes 21 days to form a new neural pathway in your mind to kind of imprint a new belief. So that's why we say the 21 days. So as long as you consistently do it for 21 days and just kind of notice what's happening to you, and don't worry too much about if you're deep enough or not deep, that kind of a thing.
Okay. Great. Anything I didn't ask or that I forgot to, you want to make sure you communicate?
I think it's just reminding people that it's you deserve to have everything you want in life. Because you desire it, it means it's meant for you. So don't take no for an answer. Kind of almost be your best self advocate and believe that you do get to have what you want, and just keep working towards it. And it is possible.
Yay. That's why I give that kind of message all the time. So where can people find out more about you, get in touch, anything you want to mention that you've got available for people?
Yeah, sure. You can find me through my website, which is kimakrigg.com, spelled KIMAKRIGG. And then on Instagram, I'm at kim.akrigg. And that's pretty much the spots that I am the most.
Okay, great. I'll put links to those two in the show notes so people don't have to remember it. So
perfect.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question-and-answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.